When Mexican Marines breached Cell 20 18 minutes after the alarm, they found Joaquin Guzman's medication still warm on the table, his bed still creased where he'd been sitting, and a hole in the shower floor that shouldn't exist. It was 9:10 p.m. on July 11, 2015. The cell door, reinforced steel designed to withstand explosive charges, swung open to reveal what every security protocol said was impossible. On the small table bolted to the wall, 2 bottles of prescription medication, their caps recently removed, the plastic still holding the heat of Guzman's fingers. The bed showed the depression of a body that had been sitting on its edge moments before. In the shower stall, behind the half-meter privacy wall that represented the only blind spot in a surveillance system worth $8 million, water still ran from the faucet. And in the floor, cut with surgical precision through reinforced concrete that was supposed to stop jackhammers, a hole 50 centimeters square opened onto darkness. The team leader aimed his flashlight down. A wooden ladder descended 10 meters into a tunnel that should not exist beneath Mexico's most secure prison. The radio traffic that followed would wake the president of Mexico from sleep and trigger an international manhunt. But in that moment, standing in cell 20 with the shower still running and the medication still warm, the Marines understood they were looking at the endpoint of something that should have been impossible. A tunnel that had been dug inch by inch toward this exact spot from somewhere beyond the prison's perimeter, arriving with the precision of a surgical strike at the one place in the entire facility where cameras could not see. Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, the man who had eluded capture for 13 years before Mexican Marines finally cornered him in a Mazatlan safe house in February 2014, had been inside Altiplano Federal Prison for 511 days. And now he was gone. The capture in Mazatlan had been the culmination of one of the longest manhunts in the history of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Guzman had escaped from Puente Grande Maximum Security Prison in 2001, allegedly hidden in a laundry cart, beginning a decade-long run as the world's most wanted drug trafficker. Forbes listed him among the world's most powerful people. The U.S. State Department offered a $5 million reward. And yet, he moved through Sinaloa and Durango like a ghost, protected by an infrastructure of safe houses, informants, and a security apparatus that rivaled small nation-states. When the Marines finally took him in that Mazatlan high-rise, pulled from a closet after a brief chase through the building's corridors, the Mexican government celebrated it as proof that no criminal could outlast the state. President Enrique Peña Nieto appeared on television within hours. The Attorney General gave press conferences, and Guzman was transferred under helicopter escort to Altiplano, a prison facility 90 kilometers west of Mexico City that had been designed specifically to hold prisoners like him. Altiplano was a cage built from paranoia and concrete. 750 cameras monitored every corridor, every cell, every angle. Biometric scanners controlled each door. Pressure sensors beneath the floors detected unusual weight distributions. The cells themselves were architectural expressions of total control. 3 meters by 4 meters, solid walls on 3 sides, a steel door with a slot for food delivery on the 4th. No windows, artificial light on a timer, temperature controlled to prevent thermal signature tracking from outside. Each cell sat in its own sound-insulated module to prevent communication between prisoners. Cell 20, where they placed Guzman, included 24-hour video surveillance with a single exception, a half-meter privacy wall in the shower stall, installed to comply with international human rights standards. Behind that wall, for perhaps 90 seconds at a time, Joaquin Guzman could stand where cameras could not see him. It was the only blind spot in the entire facility, and it was enough. The United States wanted him. In the weeks following his capture, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn, Chicago, Miami, San Diego, and El Paso filed extradition requests. The charges spanned 3 decades: conspiracy to import cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and marijuana, money laundering, murder. The evidence filled warehouses. But Mexico's Attorney General resisted extradition. Guzman would serve his sentence in Mexico first, the government insisted. National sovereignty demanded it. What the public didn't know, what wouldn't emerge until his trial years later in a Brooklyn courtroom, was that by December 2014, 10 months into his imprisonment, Construction had begun on a half-built house in a cornfield 1.5 kilometers from Altiplano's outer perimeter. The property was purchased through a shell company. Construction permits were filed with the local municipality, routine paperwork that attracted no attention. A foundation was poured. Walls went up slowly, the kind of incremental progress common in rural Mexican construction, where projects stretch across years as money becomes available. Neighbors noticed nothing unusual. The property sat on agricultural land where scattered houses and farm buildings dotted the landscape. One more half-finished structure meant nothing. But in the basement of that house, behind false walls and beneath a floor that would never be completed, engineers from Sinaloa began digging. The Sinaloa cartel had built tunnels before, sophisticated cross-border passages connecting warehouses in Tijuana to distribution points in San Diego, some equipped with ventilation systems, electric rail cars, even hydraulic doors. But those tunnels crossed under chain-link fences and sensor arrays designed to catch migrants and drug loads, not prisoners. What Guzman's engineers faced at Altiplano was a different order of magnitude. The tunnel would need to run 1.5 kilometers, nearly a mile underground. It would need to maintain precise depth and direction, arriving not at a general location, but at a specific 50-centimeter square section of floor in a specific shower stall in a specific cell. The margin for error was 0, a meter off in any direction, and the tunnel would miss cell 20 entirely, surfacing in a corridor filled with guards, or in an adjacent cell housing a prisoner who would immediately alert authorities. The solution, according to testimony that would later emerge during Guzman's U.S. trial, involved a smartwatch smuggled into Altiplano during an attorney visit. The watch contained GPS capabilities and could transmit coordinates with meter-level accuracy. The engineers working beneath the cornfield property could input those coordinates into their own GPS units and dig toward them with confidence, correcting their trajectory as they went. The excavation began 10 meters below the house's basement level. The tunnel dimensions were dictated by practical necessity: 1.7 meters tall, just enough for a man of Guzman's height to move without crouching, and 75 centimeters wide, barely shoulder width. The walls were lined with PVC sheeting to prevent collapse. A ventilation system pumped fresh air from the surface. Electric lights, powered by a generator housed in the basement above, ran the length of the passage, and at the center of the operation, sitting on steel rails that had been laid with millimeter precision, was a motorcycle. The motorcycle had been modified extensively. Its wheels had been removed and replaced with flanged rollers that locked onto the rails. The seat and handlebars remained, but the engine had been retuned to operate continuously at low speeds, moving forward and backward along the track. Behind the seat, workers had welded a flat cart bed capable of carrying loads of excavated dirt, tools, and construction materials. For 7 months, that motorcycle became the supply line for an engineering project that was happening 30 feet beneath one of the most heavily surveilled prison facilities on Earth. Workers would load the cart with dirt, the tailings from the tunnel face, and ride it back toward the entrance house. They would return with timber for tunnel supports, additional PVC sheeting, lighting equipment, tools. The motorcycle's engine noise was constant, a mechanical drone that could have been heard from the surface if anyone had been listening. But sound, it turned out, was the least of the problems. 379 truckloads of dirt came out of that tunnel. The mathematics are straightforward. A passage 1.7 meters tall, 75 centimeters wide, and 1.5 kilometers long displaces roughly 950 cubic meters of earth, dirt, rock, concrete fragments from the prison foundation at the tunnel's end. At approximately 2.5 cubic meters per truckload, removing that material required 379 trips from the property to dump sites scattered across the surrounding countryside. Someone had to drive those trucks. Someone had to operate the excavators, the pneumatic drills, the concrete saws. Someone had to monitor the GPS corrections, ensuring the tunnel stayed on course. Someone had to manage the workers, coordinate shifts, pay salaries, purchase equipment, bribe officials if necessary. The operation required logistics on the scale of a medium-sized construction company, and all of it had to happen invisibly, beneath the notice of federal authorities who knew that Joaquin Guzman represented exactly the kind of prisoner who would attempt exactly this kind of escape. According to testimony from Damaso Lopez Nunez, a former Sinaloa cartel lieutenant who cooperated with U.S. prosecutors, the escape was coordinated from outside the prison by Lopez himself, working in consultation with Guzman's wife Emma Coronel Aispuro and Guzman's sons. Messages moved in both directions through attorney visits, which Mexican law protected from surveillance. Coronel allegedly visited Altiplano regularly, carrying instructions out and bringing updates in. The timeline was driven by urgency. U.S. extradition requests were intensifying, and once Guzman was transferred to American custody, any escape would become infinitely more difficult. Inside Cell 20, Guzman waited. Guards would later report that in the weeks leading up to July 11th, he had been spending slightly longer periods in the shower. Not long enough to trigger alarms, the surveillance system flagged any absence from camera view exceeding 10 minutes, but long enough to stand behind that half-meter privacy wall and listen for sounds from below. On June 2015, he would have heard it for the first time. A faint grinding, metal against concrete, almost imperceptible beneath the sound of running water. The tunnel was close. The engineers working the tunnel face were operating in conditions that would have violated every occupational safety regulation in existence. 30 feet underground, in a passage barely wide enough to turn around, with ventilation that was adequate but not generous, they were cutting through the reinforced concrete foundation of a federal prison, using pneumatic tools that generated heat, noise, and concrete dust. One miscalculation, one drill bit that punched through into a guard corridor, one sensor that detected the vibration, and the entire operation would collapse, resulting in arrests, trials, and sentences that would span decades. But they didn't miscalculate. On the night of July 11th, 2015, the GPS coordinates aligned. The tunnel had reached Cell 20. That Saturday had been chosen deliberately. Weekend shifts at Altiplano operated with reduced staffing. Routine maintenance created ambient noise that could mask final cutting operations, and a shift change at 8:30 p.m. meant a brief window of reduced attention as guards transitioned from day to evening rotations. At 8:52 p.m., surveillance cameras recorded Joaquin Guzman walking from his bed to the shower stall. He passed behind the privacy wall and disappeared from view. The footage shows exactly what it always showed: a man stepping out of camera range to shower, an unremarkable event that happened twice daily and had happened more than 1,000 times during his imprisonment. Below, in the tunnel, the final section of concrete had already been cut from underneath. The engineers had worked from below, using diamond-tipped core drills to score a 50-centimeter square in the shower floor, weakening the concrete to the point where it could be lifted free without requiring sledgehammers or jackhammers that would generate noise and vibration. When the time came, the section could be removed silently, pushed upward from below, and pulled into the tunnel, leaving a hole just large enough for a man to descend. A wooden ladder had been positioned beneath the opening. The motorcycle sat 20 meters back, engine idling, its single headlight aimed down the length of the tunnel toward the exit house, 1.5 kilometers away. What happened in those 18 minutes is not captured on any surveillance system, but the mechanics are straightforward. Guzman stepped behind the privacy wall. Workers below pushed the concrete section upward. He pulled it aside, revealing the ladder descending into darkness. He climbed down. The concrete section was likely replaced from below, a temporary measure to delay discovery. And then Guzman was on the motorcycle, or riding behind the operator. Testimony suggests one of Emma Coronel's brothers operated the pulley system, moving through a tunnel that represented 18 months of engineering, millions of dollars in investment, and a level of logistical coordination that most legitimate construction companies would struggle to achieve. The ride took approximately 20 minutes, 1.5 kilometers at the motorcycle's cautious speed, moving through a passage where the walls were close enough to touch on both sides, where the ceiling brushed the top of a seated rider's head, where the only light came from that single headlight and the string of bulbs receding into darkness behind them. At the end, another ladder led upward into the basement of the half-built house. An ATV waited outside. A convoy of vehicles was staged nearby. By the time guards at Altiplano realized something was wrong, Guzman was already kilometers away, moving fast toward the state of Querétaro and then northwest toward Sinaloa. The alarm came at 9:10 p.m. when a surveillance operator noticed that the feed from cell 20 had frozen. The screen showed an empty cell, the bed creased but vacant, the shower area out of view behind the privacy wall. The operator called for a cell check. Guards approached cell 20 and looked through the reinforced door slot. The cell appeared empty. They entered and found the medication still warm, the shower still running, and the hole in the floor. Within 30 minutes, every federal law enforcement agency in Mexico had been mobilized. The Army deployed roadblocks across the state of Mexico. Federal police set up checkpoints on highways leading out of the region. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept the countryside. President Peña Nieto was briefed by phone at 10:15 p.m. and immediately ordered Altiplano placed on lockdown. By midnight, international media had broken the story. El Chapo had escaped from Mexico's most secure prison. The tunnel investigation began immediately. Engineers descended the ladder into the passage and followed it back toward the exit point. They found the motorcycle still sitting on its rails, engine off, waiting for a return trip that would never happen. They found the ventilation system, the lighting, the PVC-lined walls. They measured the dimensions, calculated the volume of excavated material, and estimated the cost at $5 million. Conservative, given the equipment, labor, and time required. At the exit house, investigators found construction equipment, tools, generator fuel, and evidence of worker presence. Food wrappers, cigarette butts, sleeping bags. The property was registered to a shell company that led nowhere. Neighbors interviewed by police said construction had been ongoing for months, but couldn't provide details about the workers, who came and went without speaking to anyone. 7 prison officials were arrested in the days following the escape, charged with complicity or criminal negligence. The evidence suggested that guards had been paid to ignore irregularities, to delay cell checks, to ensure that surveillance blind spots remained in place. But the full extent of corruption inside Altiplano would never be fully documented. Mexico's Attorney General insisted that the escape reflected security failures, not systemic corruption. Critics noted that distinguishing between the two was impossible when failures of that magnitude occurred inside a facility designed to prevent exactly this scenario. For 6 months, Joaquin Guzman moved through Sinaloa as he had before his capture, protected by infrastructure that had never fully dismantled during his imprisonment. The DEA admitted, weeks after the escape, that they had received intelligence about possible escape plans as early as 2014. General chatter, nothing specific, but enough to suggest that Guzman's organization was working on something ambitious. That intelligence had been passed to Mexican authorities, who insisted security at Altiplano was sufficient to prevent any escape attempt. The recapture came on January 8, 2016, in the coastal city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. A joint operation involving Mexican Marines, U.S. Marshals, and U.S. Delta Force operators surrounded a safe house based on intercepted communications. The raid began before dawn. A firefight erupted immediately. 5 cartel operatives were killed. Guzman and a lieutenant fled through a drainage tunnel, another tunnel smaller and pre-positioned for exactly this kind of emergency, and emerged in the city's sewer system. They stole a car and drove north on Highway 15. Marines stopped them at a roadblock outside the city. This time, Mexico didn't wait. On January 19, 2017, hours before Donald Trump's inauguration, Joaquin Guzman was extradited to the United States and flown to New York to face trial in the Eastern District of Brooklyn. He would never return to Mexican custody. During his trial, which lasted 3 months and included testimony from dozens of cooperating witnesses, prosecutors revealed details of the tunnel escape: the smartwatch, the GPS coordinates, Emma Coronel's alleged coordination role, the 7-month construction timeline, the 379 truckloads of dirt. Coronel sat in the courtroom gallery during much of the trial, watching as witnesses described her involvement. She was arrested in 2021 and pleaded guilty to charges related to the escape and to drug trafficking. She served 3 years. The tunnel itself was eventually destroyed, sealed with concrete, after investigators finished documenting every meter of its length. The motorcycle was preserved as evidence. Photographs of the passage, the PVC walls, the string of lights, the steel rails disappearing into darkness, became exhibits in a trial that would end with Guzman's conviction on all counts in a sentence of life imprisonment plus 30 years. Today, Cell 20 at Altiplano sits empty. The shower floor has been resealed, reinforced with steel plates and sensors that would detect any attempt at cutting from below. Additional cameras cover every angle. The privacy wall remains, human rights law still requires it, but now multiple camera angles overlap to eliminate the blind spot that existed before. The facility has implemented new protocols, random cell changes, enhanced surveillance of attorney visits, restrictions on personal items that could contain GPS devices, but the 18-minute window remains in the record. The hole that shouldn't exist, but did. A reminder that the most sophisticated prison in Mexico, protected by 750 cameras and $8 million worth of security systems, was defeated by GPS coordinates, a motorcycle on rails, and 379 truckloads of dirt that nobody noticed leaving. The tunnel ran arrow straight for 1.5 kilometers, arriving at a 50-centimeter target with the precision of a surgical strike, because someone had measured the distance between freedom and captivity and decided that depth wasn't the obstacle. Depth was just engineering. And engineering, it turned out, was something the Sinaloa cartel understood better than the Mexican government understood how to stop it.